houses were left vacant on the land, and the land was vacant because of this. Only the tractor sheds of corrugated iron, silver, and gleaming were alive, and they were alive with metal and gasoline and oil, the discs of the plows shining. The tractors had lights shining, for there is no day and night for a tractor, and the discs turn the earth in the darkness, and they glitter in the daylight. And when a horse stops work and goes into the barn, there is a life and a vitality left. There is a breathing and a warmth, and the feet shift on the straw, and the jaws champ on the hay, and the ears and the eyes are alive. There is a warmth of life in the barn, and the heat and smell of life. But when the motor of a tractor stops, it is as dead as the ore it came from. The heat goes out of it like the living heat that leaves a corpse. Then the corrugated iron doors are closed, and the tractor man drives home to town, perhaps 20 miles away, and he need not come back for weeks or months, for the tractor is dead, and this is easy and efficient. So easy that the wonder goes out of work. So efficient that the wonder goes out of land and the working of it, and with the wonder, the deep understanding and the relation. And in the tractor man, there grows the contempt that comes only to a stranger who has little understanding and no relation. When the corrugated iron doors are shut, he goes home, and his home is not the land. These words are taken from Steinbeck's novel, The Grapes of Wrath, published in 1932, but they might as well describe the situation we find ourselves in today. As the Industrial Revolution found its way into agriculture, producing crops for food became easier and more efficient. Industrialized agriculture has provided, and still provides, a plentiful amount of food for Americans and for the world, but it comes at the cost of health, for the land, for animals, for us. It has also led to a separation between man and creation. With Leviticus 25, we are at the tail end of the Holiness Code, a section of commands given by God to promote holiness among the nation Israel, to set them apart, to be holy as God is holy. Interesting in this chapter, however, is the inclusion of a law that focuses on the land itself. God has already prescribed a day of Sabbath for his people, a day of rest from the hard work accomplished during the other 6 days of the week. Here, though, we learn that the land also needs rest. Just as the people are to rest every seventh day, so the land is to rest every seventh year. A question probably arises in your mind, and to be sure, it arises in the Israelites' minds too, when in verse 20, the question is posed, "What shall we eat in the seventh year, if we may not sow or gather in our crop?" Sowing and watering and tending and pruning and reaping have been the means of assuring there is enough food to fill everyone's bellies. To halt this work means that there would be a risk of at least a couple of years without food. God responds that he will order his blessing for 3 years. The God who will provide manna with double portions the day before the Sabbath for 40 years in the wilderness will provide in abundance crops for the people and the land to rest in year 7, to plant in year 8, and to be set back on track with the fruits of their labor in year 9. Through God's requirement of the Sabbath rest for the land, there are a few things to notice. God says twice that the land shall observe a Sabbath for the Lord. Specifically, in verse 4, it's emphasized a Sabbath of complete rest. He gives the command, not merely a suggestion, that the Israelites work the land for 6 years and rest from that work in the 7th year. Not only that, but the aftergrowth, that which springs up naturally from the following season from seeds that had fallen to the ground during the reaping, is off limits. And the grapes of the unpruned vine are not to be gathered as well. The word unpruned being derived from the same root as Nazarite. Like the Nazarite is consecrated and set apart for God, so are the grapes that, left unpruned, will grow as wild as the Nazarite's hair that cannot be shaved. So rest for the land sounds great and ideal and important. I think, however, there is an even deeper issue at stake in these 7 verses. Whose land is it? With statements that humanity has dominion over creation, such as that is found in Genesis 1 and in Psalm 8, it seems to be a bit unclear to some. Dominion is, according to Webster, the power to rule or having supreme authority. So it can be easy to see why there would be confusion over who the true landowner is. But lest the Israelites think they can do whatever they want with the land, God reminds them whose land it is. God establishes his ultimate authority over creation here. By honoring his commands, the Israelites then honor the Creator God and demonstrate the trust that they have in him and his ability to provide for their needs. Today, this confusion is still rampant throughout our country. Industrial agriculture shows no signs of slowing down. The land is depleted of its nutrients through overproduction on the land, and so things like synthetic fertilizers and pesticides are infused in the soil to offset this. Practices such as these are unsustainable, and one wonders what the impact of these actions will lead to. If it appears that I should probably be preaching to those responsible for abusing and misusing the land, there actually is something we can all take from this passage, whether we've dug our hands into soil or not. We may not be farmers, but we are consumers. And in the ways we purchase things, we can be faithful stewards of the creation that God has entrusted to us. Wendell Berry, in The Unsettling of America, says that one must begin in one's own life the private solutions that can only in turn become public solutions. If a consumer begins to think and act in consideration of his responsibilities, then he vastly increases his capacities as a person. And he begins to be effective in a different way. A way that is smaller, perhaps, and certainly less dramatic, but sounder, and able sooner or later to assume the force of example. A couple of the small ways we can become better stewards are purchasing those things of quality as our bank accounts allow, and becoming producers of the bit we can, whether that's growing our own tomatoes or cooking more meals at home, something that we've been striving to do in our own household, as the option to eat out has been elected over and over again in the midst of busy lives. The choices we make do have an impact on the world around us. With the onslaught of rain we received last month, Bill Nye, yes, the science guy, expressed that this is climate change due to human actions. Whether the changes in climate are due to the life cycle of this earth, to our decisions with how we treat the earth, or a combination of the two is widely debated. However, it seems like it's in our human nature to continue doing things as we've always done, even if they don't necessarily have optimal consequences. So even though we know that being a good steward of creation can't make things worse and could make things better, old habits can be tricky to overcome. This is all to say that there could be an endless list of positive reasons we should do one thing over another, and even though we know this cognitively, it may not be enough to beget change. What we need is to connect our humanity with something bigger and beyond ourselves. The reason we should take care of creation, including ourselves, is because of our Creator, God. We are his crowning creation, meant to be faithful stewards of the creation he loves so much. Our significance is illuminated in his sending his only Son to die for our sins and be resurrected to new life that we get to take part of. And because of that, we've been invited to take part in God's act of renewal and redemption. What if our motivation of being faithful stewards of everything that's been entrusted to us went deeper than wanting to change the world for the better, although that's great too? What if we remembered our identity in Christ, who we are as new beings because of his death and his resurrection? The good news of the gospel doesn't end with our own salvation and redemption, but that of the whole world. Everything in creation, from the elm tree to the periwinkles, to the golden retrievers, to the stone at the bottom of a lake. Romans 8:22 tells us that all of creation is groaning, eagerly awaiting the redemption of the children of God. If we truly believe that God will redeem the whole world, then perhaps we should begin to view the world as indispensable, rather than as something that is here for our own purposes and pleasure. After all, as one professor pointed out, God is making all things new, not making all new things. As the reality is that there's only a small percentage of farmers, it is not difficult to come to a place of indifference and separation of that which provides us life. But when we are able to care for the non-human things, we recognize that we are all bound up with the soil and the dirt, that these things depend on us just as much as we depend on them. In the final 2 verses, we read, "You may eat what the land yields during its Sabbath, you, your male and female slaves, your hired and your bound laborers who live with you, for your livestock also, and for the wild animals in your land, all its yield shall be for food." If we read this in light of Exodus 23:10 and 11, which reads, "For 6 years you are to sow your fields and harvest the crops, but during the 7th year let the land lie unplowed and unused. Then the poor among your people may get food from it, and the wild animals may eat what is left." We realize that not only does God emphasize that he is the rightful owner of the land, and therefore we must watch over it responsibly, but also that because he is the owner, and not one person or one group of people, literally everyone is meant to partake of the abundance of his provision, not just those privileged enough to own a piece of land, but even the outsiders and poor among them, and domesticated and wild animals. I think about a small garden some friends of mine planted outside of a residence hall on Baylor's campus, a garden my husband dubs the Garden of Feeding. It is a lovely little garden with plenty of vegetables like lettuce and chard, and beautiful sweet peas in a variety of colors, and it is available to all who will come and pick from it. Their work and care of this garden, combined with their generosity of giving to any who would take, is a blessing to those who crave something good. While at first glance this passage appears to be one of granting rest to a land worked hard, it turns out that there is more than meets the eye, and that what is really addressed is the question, whose land, and our response to the answer of that question. It is a passage that beckons us to reconsider the ways in which we consume and affect the world, and that challenges us to be mindful of those who can be easily overlooked. May we be a people who celebrate the joy of God's good creation, and whose love of it and others reflects the love that we have received from God. Amen.